John-Paul,
Yeah.
welcome. You know, as I told you in my email inviting you for this conversation, I was very much moved by your article in the Tablet magazine. We're gonna attach this article, link to this article right under this video that we're gonna upload. And it reminded me that 5 years ago, we were already talking about something like this. And I decided that I wanted to talk to you again 5 years later. Things really, 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 really changed in those 5 years.
Yes.
You don't think they did, huh?
I was just seeing whether we talked before 2014 or after, and I guess we did after.
2018.
Okay, yeah.
But in any case, at that time, we talked about the nature of Ukrainian nationalism a little bit. And we did touch on, the topic where you take side that makes many so-called patriotic Ukrainians very uneasy. And that is the topic of the horrific slaughter of Jews in Lviv when Nazi Germans invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. And this article in the Tablet deals with that issue. But I invited you not simply to talk about that topic. That topic is interesting and important all on its own. But I want to talk to you as a historian of Ukrainian nationalism. And the reason I want to talk to you about it is not necessarily about the future of Jews in Ukraine, because the number of Jews has shrunk a lot for different reasons in that part of the world. And according to the recent opinion by some scholarly institution, the number within 7 to 10 years is going to shrink even more, significantly more. In some way, that is basically, on one hand, a dream come true to many of Ukrainian ideologues of Ukrainian nationalism. Stachko, Dantsov, they all wanted to kill Jews. They don't need to kill Jews no more. Jews are not there. Oops, I'm sorry. There's one guy who is now a president of Ukraine, leading Ukrainians in defense of their sovereignty in a war of aggression started by what I call fascist Russia. Fascist Russia, that is Russia that moves toward ideology that many Ukrainian nationalists absolutely adored. Now, what I want you to tell me, I'm looking at what's going on now in Ukraine in terms of Ukrainian nationalism, in terms of their ideals, people that they want, they admire. I see in Western Ukraine, Bandera, is a big hero. Shafarevich, there's streets and this. In my city of Vinnytsia, where I was born and grew up, there's a big monument for Petlura. Now, I understand that Petlura himself, for most of his life, was not anti-Semite in any sense. But it was under his leadership that Ukrainian National Army slaughtered more than 100,000 Jews in 1919. Just in one pogrom on Shabbat, February 15th, 1919, the regiment named for Petlura, Zaporizhsky Regiment, slaughtered more than 1,800 Jews. in the most horrible way. Now, I am on the side of Ukraine. What is interesting, I'm in this war with Russia. Why I'm on the side of Ukraine? Not so much because I believe that there's going to be a place for Jews in Ukraine after the war. Hopefully there will be. But there's not a lot of Jews. Hopefully there will be maybe more or less, whatever it is. But I'm against Russian imperialism. It threatens the whole world. And Ukraine today is standing on the front line, defending its own sovereignty and freedom in the world, Western Europe and the United States. Many people don't see it that way. I do. But there's another thing for me, why it's important to talk about Ukrainian nationalism. And that is the problem that is taking place now in Israel. Jews are fighting Jews, and this fight may turn not simply into something as it has been up till now, peaceful confrontation, but may actually become really a case of civil violent war. And that is another reason why I want to talk about Ukraine, because we're going to be talking about the issue of ethnic nationalism, of Ukrainians called it, some of the ideologies called it integral nationalism, following, Mussolini and others. And the issue of what is a Jewish state in Israel has become the number one issue today for me as a Jew. And not only for me, but many others. So why don't we start with talking about the nature of Ukrainian nationalism? And I want to ask you, are there any Ukrainian nationalist ideologues who, unlike Stachko, Dontsov, Bandera, had or have today an idea of Ukraine as a place where there can also live not only ethnic Ukrainians of different religious persuasions, but also maybe Russians and Jews and Poles and Tatars? Are there any such people?
Ideologues, people like Stechko and let's say Dontsov, those were ideologues.
Mm-hmm.
Do we even have real ideologues anymore? I don't know. I really don't know. I think that the days when people had really fleshed out programs and had something interesting to say are pretty much gone. But when you look at the revival of Ukraine in the late Gorbachev period and just in the first years around independence, the leading idea was of civic nationalism. That is, all people who live in Ukraine are Ukrainians. And then there's also the opposite concept with this, which is ethno-nationalism, or maybe not opposite, but a different concept. And when Ukraine became independent, civic nationalism was the main kind of ideology. But already in the 90s, it began to move. Well, there was a strong movement of ethno-nationalism, reviving the ideas of a Ukraine for Ukrainians, not necessarily in a sense of eliminating the non-Ukrainian population anymore, but rather in the sense of putting real Ukrainian, ethnic Ukrainians in charge of Ukraine. That was a program which I think began to come. That ethno-nationalist program came to power with President Yushchenko in 2005 to 2010, and again with President Poroshenko 2015 and 2019. So rather than ideologues, I would say there were certain movements in this period that reflected ethno-nationalism and originally civic nationalism. I interpret the election of Zelensky as a moment of a return to a civic nationalist mood in Ukraine. That is, he was a popular Ukrainian cultural figure. He like many kind of celebrity politicians, he came to power. But what it was it saying, we're tired of these games of, like Poroshenko's nationalism, where you have symbols, you have the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists as a symbol, Bandera as a symbol, and you have a kind of pushing of this kind of ideology. People were, I think, we're getting a little tired with that, and they were happy to vote for somebody who was, not whether he was an ethnic Ukrainian or not, only counted probably in the three Galician oblasts, and only in Lviv was the majority not for Zelensky. So I think that started a all Ukrainian civic nationalism again, or was a representative of that stream. And in a war at present, you can see both streams. You can see very, very far right organizations that are, pretty exclusivist Ukrainian. But on the other hand, all kinds of people who have a different view of Ukraine are also supporting Ukraine, fighting for Ukraine, dying for Ukraine. And these two kind of impulses, ethnic and I would call civic, are still existent in Ukraine today. Mm-hmm. And as to the future of the Jews in Ukraine, I think that there will be always Jews in Ukraine, particularly marked by religion. But there's going to be a tendency, and there is a tendency now, for everybody in Ukraine to feel Ukrainian. And Putin has done this, really. He's united the people like they've never been united before.
Putin really created Ukraine in a big way.
Yeah, he blames Lenin, but he's done more to change Ukrainian politics. And
when you send tanks and kill hundreds of thousands of people, you need to expect a reaction.
Yes, yeah. So, and it's going to be, even Zelensky has moved to a more ethno-nationalist position, especially since the summer, last summer.
Is it the reason why Putin said that he was an embarrassment to Jews?
I don't know. Whatever Putin says, he's a bit of an ideologue, but I don't think that we can take his interpretation of events with any seriousness.
Who's Putin's?
Yeah, I mean, his interpretation.
He's a very practical imperialist. I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, not so practical, Alexander. Not so practical that he's pursuing the war with any intelligence. I mean, it's true. This is so. If I were Putin, I would be so embarrassed by the not only the horrible crimes he's committing, but even just the competency of Russia's war effort. And you look at Ukraine's kind of inventiveness in this war. It's all of a sudden drones on Moscow. They don't claim they do it, but it's happening. Key Russian military figures are being killed by Ukrainian terrorists, and Putin himself has to arrest his generals, and it's a badly run war. So I don't take don't take Putin as a calculator, as a successful calculator. He won the Second Chechen War. He invaded Georgia successfully in 2008, took Crimea successfully in 2014, solved or ended the Syrian civil war, but this time he overreached himself. He had very bad intelligence, imagining that all these Russophone Ukrainians would welcome him, and that didn't happen.
Well, I hope that Ukraine will get back eastern part of Ukraine. But on the other hand, the way I see it, maybe it's not that good of idea for Ukraine to get back eastern part of Ukraine.
Yeah, I know. I understand that, Alex, because I also think the reason why Poroshenko was able to win so handily in 2015 is that you no longer had the Party of Regions in far eastern Ukraine as a real threat, and Crimea was no longer voting in Ukrainian elections. So yes, it skews it from those kind of more pro-Russian, let's say, voters, and it's created a different Ukraine. But now that Putin has not only invaded Ukraine, but has destroyed the very regions where he thought he would find support, in those Russophone regions, which he's making a mess out of, where he's, in Kharkiv, where he just destroyed apartment buildings. Like there's a famous Holocaust scholar, Alexander Kuklov. You might know of his work on the Holocaust in Ukraine. Well, his apartment was completely destroyed by these Russians. If that man had any kind of pro-Russian, and I don't know whether he ever did. I kind of doubt it. I mean, he wrote in Russian. He's a Russophone, Jewish Ukrainian. But I mean, when his apartment is destroyed, his views are going to change, and that's going to happen throughout Ukraine. So it'll be a more united Ukraine. I hope after the war, it sorts itself out in a democratic way.
Very interesting. I hope it will be in more democratic way. But by the way, I just want to say that besides Lvov region, for Poroshenko also voted Vinnytsia, where I'm from.
The Oblast? No.
I think Oblast on the whole, because Vinnytsia plays an important role in there, and they voted for Poroshenko.
Well, we can look at the results. I'm quite certain that only in Lviv Oblast.
Oblast, the whole region. So maybe I am wrong. I have to say that I would have voted if I were there. If I were citizen of Ukraine, I would have voted at that time for Zelensky, of course, not for Poroshenko, especially because Poroshenko stole the candy factory that I used to crawl over the wall to take the leftovers of chocolate and whatever they threw out in garbage, when we were, and run when the guard is going to come, and swim into the river in southern Bull. But anyway, he took the factory, fine for him, no problems. But my question is, you said that Zelensky is also moving to the ethno-nationalism. And I do see it, because there's some signs of it. And my issue with regard to Ukraine is whether Ukraine will be able, after the war, maintain a semblance of civic nationalism, democracy, and I'm not so sure. I mean, let's take a look at Poland and Hungary. They're moving toward ethno-nationalism, and as a result, they create, seemingly their natural interest would be to help Ukraine, but no.
Poland is helping Ukraine.
Yeah, by stopping the grain exports.
Poland is helping Ukraine militarily.
Yeah,
It's helping Ukraine by. I've been a lot in Poland over the past year.
I understand that they talk about it, but look at this. They stopped the grain exports through Poland.
Well, that's because when Ukraine couldn't put things out of the port, they began putting their products on the European market.
I understand. So Poland said our interests overcome our support for Ukraine. We're going to do what our farmers want us to do. And that's how naturally ethno-nationalism works.
I don't know. I think in places like Canada,
Yeah.
which is not an ethno-nationalist country except in Quebec.
Except in Quebec.
Yeah. But the country as a whole is not.
Mm.
And it also subsidizes its farmers and protects it. You know, this is just ordinary politics. It has nothing to do with nationality.
Okay, so Poland is going to take money out of its budget, and whatever grain it's not going to be allowed to go through Poland. The money from Polish budget is going to go into a budget of Ukraine, right? For help.
Well, Poland's doing quite a bit, and it's certainly accepting a lot of refugees. When I go to Poland, I see a lot of people. Well, I hear a lot of Ukrainian and Russian spoken, and that Ukrainian and Russian is all from Ukraine. If you go to church as I do in Warsaw, it is just packed with refugees. You tell the refugees they have poor clothing, and usually Ukrainians really dress up for church, and you can just smell the poverty. So many people are being accepted by Poland, and Poland has, like Hungary has its eye on Transcarpathia, on southern Transcarpathia, where there's a fairly large concentrated Hungarian minority, which speaks primarily Magyar language.
Which, by the way, was not treated fairly by government in Kiev.
By the Poroshenko government, yes, I know that. One of Poroshenko's ways of promoting the Ukrainian language was to restrict the rights of minority languages, including Russian and including Hungarian.
In my mind, by the way, this pushed Russians in the East to support those pro-Putin elements there.
Well, I don't know. I would say that the restrictions on the Russian language began rather late in the course of the pro-Russian elements in the East.
But then, in Kiev, they decided that they went too far and changed it back. But it was too late.
Well, they had different, they in the end, minority language education was restricted, and minority languages were pushed out of other spheres. But there were some back and forths. But right now, the language issue is still contentious. There has not been a restoration of minority language rights.
It will be contentious for a long time. And for me, another element of Ukrainian identity, and that is religious element, is also of great interest, because it's like among Jews, it seems like Jews, we are the people, but then we have all kinds of, we have Orthodox, strictly Orthodox, reformers, conservative, that do all
Chabad.
things, Chabad, so, and each one thinks that they are the Jews, for a variety of reasons. And in Ukraine, you have what? You have Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian, ethnic Ukrainians, Russian Orthodox.
You don't have Russian Orthodox in Ukraine.
Yes, you do. I mean, the major church now in Odessa was bombed by Russia. It was Russian Orthodox Church.
No, it wasn't a Russian Orthodox Church. It was Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
I'm sorry, it was Russian Orthodox Church, and the guy who was in charge of the church made a complaint to Kirill, the patriarch in Moscow, saying, "What are you doing?" And they responded back saying, "We do what you say. You are a traitor and everything else."
Ukrainian Orthodox Church
Yeah.
was associated with the Patriarch of Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
It broke those relations pretty much completely on the 22nd of May or March, I forget which month, of 2022.
Okay. Or
And
2022 in March, so they broke right after invasion. They broke the relations.
yes,
Really? I
yes.
missed it. I know that
That's
after,
because there's a propaganda campaign by the nationalists to destroy that church. And so they always call it the Moscow Church.
just one second. What do you mean? Ukrainian nationalists campaign to destroy Russian Orthodox Church?
No, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This is the, when you use that
But
terminology,
just one second. Let's just deal a little bit. So now, what used to be called Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine,
they still
now,
call it that, but there never was a Russian Orthodox Church in independent Ukraine.
okay, we'll talk about it. I disagree, but because I know exactly
It's
that
easily checkable.
in Vinnytsia, there were major conflicts around the ownership of churches precisely because of that. But that is not the point. What I'm saying is this. So let's say that there was Ukrainian Orthodox Church, although, just a few months ago, the police entered the premises of Russian Orthodox churches in Kiev, and confiscated all kinds of things there. But that is not the point.
Excuse me, Alexander.
Yes.
That was on the 6th of January, 2023, this year.
Okay.
They released pictures of what they found. And if you look at those pictures, the only piece of kind of incriminating evidence is a Russian tricolor flag. The rest they were showing were history of Christianity in China.
JOHN-PAUL, I'm not arguing about you about this. This is of no importance. What I'm saying is different. Until recently, there was Russian Orthodox Church. There was Ukrainian, which they called Otokefal, Автокефальная церковь, that is, which was started by Lenin in 1922 or something like this.
I said you should stick to Jewish topics. I don't think you understand Ukrainian religious history.
But I'm interested not in the religious history, but in divisions, religious divisions among.
There are divisions. There are at present 3 major churches in Ukraine.
Please tell me, which are they in your mind?
There's the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is primarily based in the
West.
Grecian region in the West,
Mhm.
and in Transcarpathia, but it's not united with the one in Lviv.
Just one second. There's in Transcarpathian region. There's another Greco-Catholic Church.
Yes, different jurisdiction.
And it's not united with the one in Precarpathia.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we have 2 churches. Continue.
Well, but basically they're the real players, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. They both under Rome, both closely related, but different jurisdictions.
Okay, continue, please. Which others?
And then there's the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which was created in 2018 by Poroshenko, and the United States State Department was also behind it. And it is under the Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. And it united 2 former churches, which were the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church, Orthodox Church, and the Kiev Patriarch Church.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the Kiev Patriarch Church is now.
It's 2018, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which had been self-ruled since 1991. It was under the Moscow Patriarchate, just as the other church is now under the Patriarch of Constantinople, but it broke all relations after the full-scale invasion. So those are three churches.
So last year it separated itself from the Moscow Patriarch, at least formally.
Yes.
Okay, and then there's a Ukrainian church, Автокефальная, we say
There is no Autokefalna anymore.
not anymore. It disappeared when? Because it lasted for
Disappeared in 2018.
2018, right? But that Автокефальная church was the major collaborator with Nazi Germany in Ukraine during the war.
There were three Ukrainian autocephalous churches.
Okay.
As I say, Alexander, maybe you want to stick to Jewish topics.
No.
The first one was founded in 1921,
Uh-huh.
and it lasted till 1930, when most of its members and clergy were arrested, and was completely dissolved by Stalin in 1937.
Yeah.
Then, in World War II, bishops from Western Ukraine restored it
Mm-hmm.
they renamed themselves the Autocephalous Church, and it was definitely collaborated with the Germans. And then that church died in Ukraine because, of course, the Soviets reconquered. And then in 1989, it reconstituted itself.
89.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there were three births of that church, and the profile, each of them was different. The 1921 church was a radical reinvention of orthodoxy, socially radical. The 1941 church was a collaborationist nationalist church, and the 1989 church was a kind of Ukrainian church that wanted to be orthodox, but not under Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. So now we have how many churches in Ukraine?
Three basic churches.
Three basic churches. And what is the number of people that belong to those churches?
You can't tell. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yeah. And
always with the number of parishes.
Mm-hmm.
And among them, the two biggest churches are the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which broke relations with the Moscow Patriarchate, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church has a lot of people. And I would say the third smallest is the one that's under the Patriarch of Constantinople. But the government has been persecuting one of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and has been transferring parishes to the Orthodox Church in Ukraine since 2018. And then there was a break when Zelensky was elected, but since July of last year, he's begun persecuting the church again.
Mm-hmm. So when there's going to be a national Ukrainian church, I'm saying national, or there's going to be all three, how they're going to settle conflicts between themselves. I mean, in Russia, there's Russian Orthodox Church that now is the main church serving Putin and things like this. In Ukraine, you do not have such situation.
No, and you never did.
Never did. Do you think it will be? I mean, there's people in all of those churches probably that want to have something, and they want their church to be the number one.
Yeah, I think there are ambitious people in these churches who would like to do that. But, if you know Ukrainian religious history, you notice that there's kinds of these counter trends and leaning towards Rome, leaning towards Moscow, leaning towards Constantinople.
I understand it all. I mean, it's the situation with any religious movement, especially in Ukraine. Has especially interesting, to say the least, history of this thing. But I know that in my memory, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were many conflicts between various churches for the church property.
Yes, the 1990s.
Yeah, that were very intense.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that once the war is over, this conflict is going to come back.
Could be, but probably.
On a bigger scale, much bigger scale.
Well, that's, I don't predict the future. I'm a historian.
But you're historians in order to predict the future. So to know the future, to know the past is the foundation of understanding today, and maybe understanding a little bit, having a little view of what is going to be tomorrow.
But we don't know, we don't know whether Ukraine will be completely successful in the war, partly successful, and there are scenarios under which it could be defeated. So if we don't know that,
I don't think it will be defeated. And when you say partially or completely, in my view, Ukraine has achieved the biggest goal that it could possibly have. I mean, before the war, there was much more differences onto the idea of what is Ukraine and what is Ukrainian. Today, Ukraine has been united in a big way, at least around the language. Now, about religion, problems remain. And then there's also problems remain with regard to ethnic belonging, because Russians don't identify themselves as Ukrainians, and Ukrainians don't identify themselves as Russians, despite what Putin said. I've lived there many years. I've never heard Russian saying that he's Ukrainian or Ukraine that he's a Russian.
well, it's happening now for sure.
Really? How is it happening?
Well, for one thing, you have the census results.
Okay.
No longer is there nationality in the passport.
I understand that.
That has given the apparent idea that Russians and Jews were leaving Ukraine, but in fact not. They were just calling themselves Ukrainians, and that's what's going to.
Well, if a Jew calls himself Ukrainian, then he is no longer really a Jew. If he calls himself Ukrainian citizen, then of course he's a Jew. But if he calls himself Ukrainian, as Ukrainian ethnically, he's no longer a Jew.
Well, they don't have to call themselves ethnically, do they?
Well, I do not know.
No, they don't, because under the census,
Yeah.
you just choose what nationality you want to identify with.
But nationality there is always defined in ethnic terms.
No.
Is your father or mother is Ukrainian or Jewish, and that's what defines you as a person.
Not by law.
It's not, I understand, it's not like in America where you're American or Canadian and you can be anything you want by race, by ethnicity, and whatever your mother or father does not make any difference. And there's no such thing as American ethnicity or Canadian ethnicity. That's not the case in Ukraine.
Well, you can't have a civic nationalism without no nationalism retreating. And that's what has been happening, is that people are, and there was an article just recently at the lead article in Slavic Review, the major journal of American Slavists, which said that really we can't use these old concepts of Russians and Ukrainians and Ukrainians in Ukraine, because there's been such a melding of the cultures. And I think that's correct.
Was it written by Russian or by Ukrainian?
Ukrainian.
Well, so in one way, what I see there is an attempt by ethnic Ukrainians to redefine in their own eyes the demographic structure of the Ukraine.
Well, I think there are tendencies, because there are also counter tendencies, but there are tendencies towards a united, in all the citizens of Ukraine are Ukrainians. It doesn't mean that they're all. And what does ethnic Ukrainian even mean?
Oh, Ukrainians know exactly what it means.
You
And I'll
know,
tell you this, the Jews in Ukraine also know the difference, just the same way as Ukrainians know. And they may speak Ukrainian and they may consider themselves Ukrainian citizens, but Ukrainian, left all on its own, he has a very clear definition, or at least on the level of feelings, regardless of documents. And the difference remains in a big way, very, very sharply.
yeah, the intermarriage has been going on for centuries in Ukraine, centuries and centuries and centuries. Last names, ethnic Ukrainian last names like Tatarenko, and there's a whole series of names that could come from Greek or other, because Ukraine was always a place where there were lots of different people. There are Tatar names that ethnic Ukrainians have. But a lot of those features which defined ethnicity in the past are in retreat. So, religion. I have a friend, he's a Holocaust scholar, who is now serving as a rabbi to a small Jewish community in Kiev. He's a convert.
In Kiev?
Yes. And
is he a Jew for Jesus?
No.
He is a Jew.
No. He's a convert.
Okay, well, a convert is a Jew.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
So
ethnically, he was not born.
that's fine. To me, it makes no difference. I mean, he's just as much a Jew as I am.
But my point is this.
Yeah.
And the reason he's serving as a rabbi, because the rabbi of that community fled to the United States when the war broke out. And in that community, hardly anybody knows anything about Judaism, but he's a brilliant scholar, by the way. And he has a good command of Hebrew. He's spent a long time in Israel, and he knows so much about the Jewish tradition, but his congregation knows almost nothing. So these kind of things are there. That with the retreat of religion in most people's lives, that no longer identifies them as strongly, and the language is changing. A lot of people are. I mean, if you listen to the soldiers on the front, they're still speaking a lot of Russian on the front.
Yeah.
But they're. Oh, I just was in Ukraine not long ago.
They're speaking Russian, but they're dying for Ukraine.
Yes. And I'll give you a story that I think encapsulates one of the trends going on. So we were sitting in a train compartment with a woman who spoke to us all the time in Russian, in very idiomatic kind of Russian, but when they came to check our passports on the train, her Ukrainian was perfect literary Ukrainian. Just it was more comfortable for her, to talk in Russian. Just like for me, I'm a much better writer in English than I am in Ukrainian because I have all that stuff. So there's a fluidity here that that's kind of interesting. So,
by the way, I just want to mention, you can tell it to your rabbi friend that we're in the process of preparing the first ever Torah edition in Ukrainian.
How can you have a Torah in Ukrainian?
Why not? Well, you have Torah in Russian or Torah in English. It's translation, of course. The original is Hebrew, but
Really?
Of course.
Oh.
I mean, there's a number of different translations into Russian. There's a number of different translations into English. I mean, for Jewish Publication Society, Hebrew, English, Tanakh, I did it for them.
Wait a minute, will these be Torah scrolls?
What is it?
Are these Torah scrolls?
So it's not Torah scrolls. It's books of Torah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Torah scrolls only in Hebrew, unvocalized, uncantilated Hebrew.
Okay.
Yeah, but so people can understand, read and understand, because the way I see it, a child goes to school, and he comes back with some idea, from teacher or students, and they quote, Christian Bible, in Ukrainian. He comes home to his father, and father cannot do anything. But now he'll have Torah, to be able to show it, and maybe your rabbi friend, can also make available to his Ukrainian-speaking audience.
Well, if you send me the particulars, I will send it to him.
Let me put it this way: once we're going to finish the book of Genesis, which should be any time, and we hope to finish it within like 6 months, and it's going to be available. In electronic edition, it's going to be available free of charge for anybody who is interested.
And I think that's what would work best for Ukraine right now.
Yeah, and whoever wants to have it printed, they can pay for it. But electronic will be available to anybody. But in any case, continue, please. So, but what I'm saying is this: you see, there's differences now. Ethnicity, biology is not that important. As you see, I recognize a person who is biologically did not have Jewish ancestors as fully Jewish because he converted.
Yes, and there were numerous cases, important cases, where people of truly Polish ethnicity became Ukrainian patriots, right? So you have Andrei Sheptetsky.
Ukrainian patriots is not a problem, and just because you're Polish, you become Ukrainian, by religion. I mean, Dzerzhinsky, was not religious. When there's no religion, then it's very difficult for Poles to become Ukrainians. Or Ukrainians become Poles if there's no religion.
Oh, well, in the past, that was the marker, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there were also, so Vyacheslav Lipinski, the famous ideologue, was Polish. The Rilsky family was Polish. There's a whole series. And Russians too, like Dontsov and Dontsov had brothers who became Russians, right?
Bolsheviks. I mean,
yeah.
He became the really nasty case of Nazi. But his brothers were, but they were, they were Bolsheviks. And
and in Ukraine is, that the famous book Bloodlands by Tim Snyder. Well, first he was going to write a book called Brotherlands, because he had so many cases where one family would have several nationalities, and that really did happen, right? Like the Mickiewicz family and others, they had, some of them became Poles, some became Lithuanians, some became Ukrainians, some became Poles. My late mother-in-law came from right around Grodno area, where Belarus meets Ukraine and Poland, and it was part of the Russian Empire. She was fluent in Polish, she was fluent in Russian, she was fluent in Ukrainian, and she also understood Belarusian, and that family went in different directions. Most of them married Pelurites and therefore became Ukrainians, but they could have gone in any direction. Moreover, that turns out we did the DNA testing, and she was half Jewish.
Oh my God! Oh my!
So this is the old Ukraine. The old Ukraine was a place where people just messed each other up, and then when nationalism came, ethnic identity became more prescribed, more hardened. But in the past, even though there were ethnic conflicts in the past, the fluidity among them, mixed marriages, for instance. So many Polish Ukrainian, Romanian Ukrainian, Hungarian Ukrainian,
when there was before the war, before this aggression, before 1914, there was a major support in Ukraine for conception of Ukraine as the country of civic nationalism. Now, with the war, it moved away from it, especially because 20% of Eastern territories are gone, which were populated largely by Russian speakers. So what I'm saying is this. In your estimate, in your feeling, does the future of Ukraine lie in emphasis on ethnicity, religion, or civic belonging?
I suspect that the war is going to come out with a, as I say, I don't predict, but an amalgam of civic and ethnic, in the sense that those who supported Ukraine during this war will automatically be Ukrainian, whether they're Jewish, Tatar, or anything like that.
But Zelensky is not going to be expelled?
I think that that's a remote possibility.
That he will be expelled?
Remote, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Because in my mind, he played a role that Poroshenko could not have been able to match in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest mistakes of Putin was that he did this war in 2022 instead of 2019. 2019, he had Trump as president and he had Poroshenko as president of Ukraine.
Yeah.
That was the time to do it. I mean, that was a big, major mistake to begin with. I think Zelensky's not a popular president in Ukraine.
He was not popular before the war, but then he became popular. Now he's not as popular. And my question is, what is the reason for reduction of his popularity?
Well, okay, I went to Ukraine. So people feel that he didn't prepare for the war. He reduced the military budget. He built infrastructure which actually served the Russians when they invaded. Those, I think, and also a lot of people feel that since he wasn't a professional politician and just a clown, as they like to call him, he was not a serious president. On the other hand, Zelensky's done extremely well in handling the West.
It's not simply handling the West, but handling many elements of Ukrainian society, bringing together.
I don't know.
Poroshenko,
I think he did that before the war.
Before the war and during the war.
I think during the war, I'm not so sure.
No. Okay.
I didn't meet anybody in Ukraine who was pro Poroshenko. I mean, pro Zelensky. That might just be the people.
That is so. Now, when they're supposed to have elections next
after the war.
After the war. So during the war, they're not going to be elections.
Oh no.
Let me ask you a question. Do you know why Zelensky? It's not relevant to our topic, but maybe in some way relevant. Why Zelensky stripped Kolomoisky of Ukrainian citizenship?
Oh, you're asking me to talk about internal Ukrainian politics.
Yeah.
Make no sense. So a person like Kolomoisky, who was a patron of those far right,
Azov.
Yeah, far right things. And he was, there's there was a plan to publish my book, which you have on there, Ukrainian Nationalists, the Holocaust, in a Ukrainian translation.
Mhm.
And actually, Kolomoisky was going to fund that, I
Wow.
understand. So, how to understand these oligarchs and their positions and the attitude of the president towards particular oligarchs, I don't know. Perhaps it's because perhaps Zelensky had something against Kolomoisky because everybody said he was just a mouthpiece for Kolomoisky.
Hmm. Well, because meaning because Kolomoisky helped him a lot. That's why he was against Kolomoisky, yeah.
People accused him of being, under his.
But what about that governor of Dnipropetrovsk region, who also was stripped of a Jewish governor of who was very popular governor of Dnipropetrovsk region, who was stripped at the same time as Kolomoisky?
I have, like I say, to me, Ukrainian politics are opaque.
Mm-hmm.
This is not Canada, where if a cabinet minister spits on the floor, it's reported on the front pages of the newspaper. This is Ukraine, where no political murder has ever been solved. Where one day it looks like Poroshenko and Medvedchuk are the arch enemies, and it turns out they were collaborating all along. This is not a transparent society where you can figure out the politics. You're welcome to try to do it. But
no, I'm not going to try to do that. I mean, but I try to understand because Ukraine has very difficult task of building itself as a united, strong society. And I'm trying to figure out
impoverished at the same time.
what is it?
And impoverished by the war.
Build
a strong, sane, healthy, democratic society after you've just been,
but I believe that when the war stops, and if Ukraine is going to be militarily secure, the economic rebuilding is going to be very, very fast. Very fast. You can just take a look at Poland and how it's afraid of Ukrainian grain. It will be afraid even more of other things coming from Ukraine after the war, because Ukraine is going to be providing all kinds of things at lower prices. I mean, I was in Poland in 1989 when there was elections for this solidarity and everything else, and they were all complaining to me, oh, we are impoverished, oh, we cannot do anything. And I was telling them, look at this, just keep on course and you're going to become very prosperous. And that's what happened. And the same thing, even more so for Ukraine. But Ukraine must, of course, win the permanent access to Black Sea and eventually come to peace with Russia. No matter what type of Russia is going to be, there has to be a peace between Ukraine and Russia again. Now, I just hope that Ukrainians are not going to build that peace with Russia on common hatred of Jews again. But we'll see.
I think that's unlikely.
Okay.
But then again, Alexander, I have to say, you look at a guy like Orban, and you look at the anti-Soros campaign, which is, Soros is the Rothschild of our day.
It's comfortable. It's comfortable for Orban. It's funny because it was Soros in many ways helped Hungary to become a new Hungary. He was one of the earliest ones, and now Orban, turns against him and says that he is a problem, he is a criminal, and he is the.
And a lot of people believe that. I mean, in America too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Soros, is new Rothschild.
He's the guy.
Yeah,
but I don't think. First of all, the Jewish minorities in Ukraine and Russia are not really so large.
they're large, but they're everywhere, just like before. Everywhere. Take a look at people around in Ukrainian government. Take a look at people around Putin. It's everywhere, and for any politician, sheer Ukrainians or real patriotic Russian, it's very simple to say, all problems between Ukraine and us, Russia, were caused by Jews. Now that we understand it, we can build peace among ourselves.
But I don't, I try to follow to some extent the right wing in Ukraine,
Okay.
the current right wing. I'm not so clear on the Russian right wing. I just don't study it. But what I see of the Ukrainian right wing, it is anti-leftist, anti-gay, against Africans, and those are the people, gypsies or Roma, Tsehana, they're against them. But I don't see them having much to say about the Jews. Sometimes you get it, but basically they're against others. On the other hand, history shows that although Ukrainians during World War II were mainly against Poles and mainly against Russians,
and Europe before 1919 was a great friend of Jews. He was being accused of being Philo-Semite and things like this. A Jew lover.
To me, the maintenance and the resurgence of anti-Semitism just boggles my mind.
Well, it means that people are alive, and when it comes to Jews, they all define themselves vis-a-vis Jews. In on the plus side, minus side, Jews always played, and continue to play a very important role. For me, the issue is when they stop killing us. But now what I see is Jews, that is among ourselves, we're repeating, we're going back not 75 years, we're going back 3,000 years. I mean, there's people in Tel Aviv who now are thinking that they should divide themselves from Jerusalem and have their own secular state. People go nuts every way you can think about. And
well, we live in a desperate age, really.
When we haven't lived in desperate age. When was the age?
Well, I would say that I can remember times that were quite different.
Really? What times are those?
Well, I would say, for instance, that for much of the world, the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, that was great. It was realization of my dream, that I gave my life to. That is collapse of the one-party dictatorship in the Soviet Union. And it seemed like it was promising. Who wrote that book?
And apartheid in South Africa. We forget that.
Well, it came about because there were changes in the Soviet Union. The whole world was changing.
Yeah, so that was a real time of optimism.
Yeah.
But I don't think there are a lot of grounds for optimism in our present age. Once again, we have a polarization throughout many countries, certainly all the countries of the West, and many countries in Asia, between it's not like fascism and communism in the 1930s, but I would say the liberals and the alt-right are in every country divided. You can never tell who's going to win the next election. I mean, we just had an election in Spain, right, where Vox, I think, is going to be a part of a coalition, and and in Israel, Netanyahu, I'm not going to talk Israeli politics unless you want to, but Netanyahu is very different. He belongs in that Netanyahu, Trump, Duterte, Bolsonaro. That's just one thing. Then we have the climate change problem. The weather here can be very nice in the summertime, but the smoke can be so bad you can't even go outside.
You have smoke in Canada?
Oh, you betcha we have smoke.
I thought all smoke that you produce you shipped down south to the United States.
We do some of that, yes, we export, but we certainly keep a lot for domestic consumption.
Okay.
And that's just one little note on the climate change issue. Then we had
John-Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We need to finish now because it's
okay.
over the hour. But what I want to do,
edit out what you don't like.
if no, I'm not editing nothing. But what I want to do, because I know that you're also expert and know a lot about Vinnytsa's massacre.
Yeah.
I want you to talk about it some other time. Specifically prepare for that, not simply in terms of the use for Nazi propaganda that was made during the war, but for leftover of that memory. I mean, 23,000 people, 1,000 Jews were murdered in Vinnytsia. That is my hometown. And there's 5 ditches where they were dropped. One ditch contains bodies only of Jewish children. And I'm very connected to this thing. You know, that building, KGB building, where on the behind which all the executions of those people were taking place, I was interrogated there too, and in a mental hospital where they were giving me all kinds of shocks and discipline shocks.
Yeah, so yeah, I know exactly that time period in the Soviet Union. Oh, that was terrible. You were a victim of that too?
I never was a victim of anything. I was the person who was fighting against the Soviet Union. I created, by the way, seeing that you in 70s, 80s was a Marxist, Leninist, whatever it is, I started, it's three people underground called Communist Prometheus in 1970. That is the last year of my schooling, you know, and then we were demanding, you know, letters to Brezhnev and so to abolish the one-party dictatorship and go back to the ideal of Soviet October Revolution, all power to the Soviets, you know, free elections and things like this. That is after I already was taken under advice, under surveillance by the KGB in 1968. When I was 14, I wrote a letter to Brezhnev, open letter, protesting invasion of Czechoslovakia. It was my first act. And then major of KGB came from Moscow to Vinnytsia and things like this. So my life is connected to Vinnytsia in a big way, besides the factory of Poroshenko. And I want to talk to you one time about this massacre, Vinnytsia massacre, because they were, I tried to investigate different aspects of it, you know. Of course, the accusation was that it was Jewish and KVD people, you know, that were doing it, you know, and they were killed all those people, and then on and on and on and on. And I want to talk about it because Jewish did it. Ukrainians need to be very careful about this accusation of Jews being Bolsheviks, like Nazis did.
Yeah, I think so.
They have to be very, very careful because, you know, after February 15th, 1919, pogrom in Proskurov, which turned all Jews toward Bolsheviks because there was no other place to turn to. That is pogrom, massacre by Ukrainian nationalists. So Ukrainians need to be very, very careful when they point finger to Jews, because they need to take a look at what were the situation, how people react normally in such situations, things like this. But in any way, whenever you're ready, I'd be more than happy to invite you and talk about the Vinnytsia massacre. But for now, I have to say thank you very much, John-Paul, and it was a pleasure talking about these things, and hopefully, at least for me, it did something. Hopefully for our viewers, it will do something as well.
Okay, well, thanks for talking. I'll see you.
As they say in China, sei gesund. They don't say it in China. Bye.